It's just business, Diane. Don't take it personally. Those were the last words he said to me, my brilliant, charismatic boyfriend who was supposed to be my partner for my golden years. He had just finished explaining, with the chilling calm of a corporate raider, how he had systematically emptied my entire retirement account. Then he smiled, closed the bathroom door, and locked it from the outside. He thought he had trapped me, a 59-year-old retired bank manager, helpless while he made his clean getaway. He had made one critical, life-altering mistake. He had forgotten about the old pay-as-you-go flip phone I kept in the vanity drawer for emergencies. It wasn't a smartphone. It couldn't track him, but it could make one single, very important phone call. A call to the one person in the world who knew more about his dirty business than he did. His other victim. This is the story of a man who thought he had planned the perfect exit strategy, and a woman who was about to orchestrate a hostile takeover he never saw coming. If you believe the best revenge is a well-placed phone call, subscribe now and hit the notification bell, because you are about to witness a con man's assets get permanently and satisfyingly frozen. Part 1. The silence in the bathroom was absolute. For a moment, my mind refused to accept the reality of the situation. I could still smell his expensive cologne, a scent I had associated with safety and romance for the past 8 months. Now, it was the scent of betrayal. I sank down onto the cool, tiled floor, my back against the locked door, and tried to breathe. My heart was a wild, panicked bird beating against the cage of my ribs. Julian, the man who had swept into my quiet, post-retirement life like a California wildfire, all dazzling energy and intoxicating promises. The man I had, to my own profound shock, fallen in love with. The man who had just calmly explained that our entire relationship had been a business transaction, and he had just completed the final withdrawal. I had spent my entire life in the world of banking. I started as a teller at 22 and worked my way up to branch manager, a 37-year career built on a foundation of trust, procedure, and a deep, abiding respect for the rules. I understood numbers. I understood risk. I understood people, or so I had thought. After my husband's death and my subsequent retirement, I had felt adrift. My life, once a predictable ledger of debits and credits, was now a blank page. Julian had been the new, exciting entry. I met him at a seminar, one of his financial freedom workshops that were all the rage in my San Diego suburb. He was a magnetic speaker, a guru of positivity, who preached a gospel of smart investing and living your best life. He was everything my late, cautious husband was not. A risk-taker, a dreamer, a man who saw the world as a limitless opportunity. He had singled me out after the seminar, his eyes full of a warm, admiring light. He was impressed, he said, by my sharp questions, by my banker's brain. He had pursued me with a gentle, flattering intensity. Our romance was a whirlwind of nice restaurants, weekend trips to wine country, and long talks about the future. He was starting a new, exclusive investment fund, he'd told me, for a small, hand-picked group of clients. He wanted me to be his partner, not just in life, but in business. He said my experience, my steady hand, would be the perfect complement to his visionary style. It was the most intoxicating thing anyone had ever said to me. I, the sensible, practical bank manager, was being invited into a world of high-stakes, high-return excitement. Over the next few months, at his direction, I had moved my entire retirement portfolio, a sum I had spent a lifetime accumulating, into this new fund. I had signed the documents, giving him, my partner, discretionary control. I had given him my trust, and now he had just cashed it all in. The fund is being dissolved, he had explained, standing in the doorway of my bathroom as I was getting ready for what I thought was a dinner date. The assets have been moved to a more secure offshore location. My location. He had smiled then, a cold, dead smile that did not reach his eyes. You were the seed money, Diane, and I do appreciate it. Then he had closed the door and locked it. The sound of the deadbolt was the sound of my life, my future, my entire carefully constructed world, breaking in two. He had singled me out after the seminar, as the other attendees were packing up their free tote bags and filtered water bottles. He had approached me not with a cheesy pickup line, but with a look of genuine intellectual curiosity. "Diane, right?" he'd said, his voice a low, confidential murmur that made it feel like we were the only two people in the room. "Your question about leveraged bond yields was brilliant. You have a banker's brain." The compliment was so specific, so tailored to the part of myself I had just lost in retirement, that it felt like a key turning in a long-rusted lock. I felt seen, acknowledged. For the first time in a year, I felt like more than just a widow, more than just a retiree. I felt like myself again. His pursuit was a masterpiece of calculated, gentle intensity. It was not the clumsy chase of a younger man. It was a patient, strategic siege. Our first date was for coffee, where we talked for 3 hours about the Federal Reserve. Our second was a long walk on the beach in Coronado, where he confessed his own loneliness, the emptiness of his success without a partner to share it with. He was building a narrative, a shared story of two brilliant, lonely souls finding each other in the golden years. The whirlwind romance that followed was a blur of perfectly curated Californian moments. A weekend trip to a boutique winery in Temecula, where he charmed the winemaker into giving us a private tour. A sunset dinner at a cliffside restaurant in La Jolla, where he spoke with such passion about his vision for a new, smarter way to invest. "The big banks, the one you worked for," he'd said, taking my hand across the table. "They're dinosaurs, Diane. They're slow. They're conservative. They're leaving millions on the table." He told me about his new exclusive investment fund, a project he spoke of in hushed, excited tones. It was a boutique fund, he explained, for a small, hand-picked group of sophisticated investors. It was agile, it was aggressive, it was the future. And then he had delivered the line that had sealed my fate. "I don't just want your investment, Diane," he'd said, his soulful eyes locked on mine. "I want your partnership. I'm a visionary, but I'm impulsive. You're the steady hand, the voice of reason. Your experience would be the anchor to my sail. I want to build this with you." It was the most intoxicating, most validating thing anyone had ever said to me. I, the sensible, by-the-book bank manager, was being offered a second act, a chance to be part of a world of high-stakes, high-return excitement. It was a fantasy, and I had walked into it with my eyes wide open. Over the next few months, the transfer of my life's work happened in a series of quiet, clinical steps. It felt not like a gamble, but like a professional merger. At his direction, I had systematically liquidated my entire retirement portfolio. The 401k I had diligently contributed to for 37 years. The stocks my late husband had so carefully chosen. The bonds I had purchased for their slow, steady security. It was a sum I had spent a lifetime accumulating, a number that represented my entire past and my only future. I had signed the documents he'd prepared, thick packets of legal jargon about the JDV Global Opportunities Fund, giving him, my partner, my love, my future, discretionary control. I had given him my trust, a commodity I had once guarded with my life, and now, standing in the doorway of my bathroom, his silhouette framed by the soft light of the hallway, he had just cashed it all in. The charming visionary was gone, replaced by a stranger with cold, dead eyes. "The fund is being dissolved," he had explained, his voice devoid of any emotion, the calm, flat tone of a corporate announcement. "The assets have been moved to a more secure offshore location. My location." He had paused then, letting the words sink in, letting the full, catastrophic weight of my ruin settle upon me. He smiled, a thin, cruel, triumphant smile. "You were the seed money, Diane. Excellent returns. And I do appreciate it." He had stepped back, and before I could even process the words, before I could scream or plead or even breathe, he had closed the heavy oak door. The quiet click of the lock was followed by the brutal, final thud of the deadbolt sliding home. It was the sound of a safe being closed. It was the sound of my life, my future, my entire carefully constructed world, breaking in two. Part 2. My hidden power was not a secret skill or a hidden fortune. It was a detail. A single, seemingly insignificant detail I had noticed weeks ago but had dismissed as a strange coincidence. It was a phone call. I had been at Julian's sleek rented condo in La Jolla a few weeks prior. He was in the shower, and his phone, which he never, ever let out of his sight, had buzzed on the nightstand. The caller ID was a woman's name, Margaret, with a picture of a kind-faced, smiling woman in her 60s. When I had mentioned it to him later, he had waved it away. "Just another client," he'd said. "A sweet but very needy widow from up north. Wants me to manage her inheritance." I had accepted the answer, but the woman's face had stuck in my mind. There was something familiar about her, a warmth in her eyes that felt genuine. My antagonist, Julian, was a modern-day vampire. He didn't drain blood, he drained life savings. His financial freedom seminars were not educational events. They were hunting grounds. He was a master of a specific kind of Californian New Age grift, a blend of positive thinking, investment jargon, and quasi-spiritual babble that was designed to disarm the skepticism of a recently retired, financially comfortable, and emotionally vulnerable demographic. He didn't just sell an investment, he sold a dream. The dream of a secure, exciting, and meaningful second act. He had identified me, with my banker's resume and my recent widowhood, as the perfect target. I was not just a source of funds. I was an unwitting source of credibility. My presence at his side, my clear adoration for him, was the ultimate testimonial to his other potential victims. If the retired bank manager trusts him, he knew they would think, then he must be legitimate. My best friend Maria, my neighbor for 20 years, the woman who had held my hand at my husband's funeral and had sat with me in the crushing silence of the weeks that followed, had hated Julian on sight. It wasn't a logical dislike. It was a deep, primal, instinctual revulsion. Maria was a kindergarten teacher, a profession that had gifted her with a finely tuned, professional-grade bullshit detector. She had spent 3 decades in the trenches with 5-year-olds. She knew the difference between a real smile and a performance. I had invited Julian to our casual neighborhood barbecue, wanting to show him off, wanting her, my closest confidant, to validate my newfound happiness. He had been a masterpiece of charm, of course. He had complimented her garden. He had laughed at her husband's terrible jokes. He had even, to my amazement, gotten down on the ground to play with her yappy little terrier. Later that evening, as we had cleared the plates, I had looked at her, my eyes shining, waiting for her approval. She had just looked at me, her expression unreadable, and wiped a smudge of barbecue sauce from a plate. "I don't like his eyes, Di," she had said, her voice quiet but firm. I had felt a flash of hot, defensive anger. "What are you talking about? His eyes are beautiful." "No," she had insisted, finally meeting my gaze. "They're like a shark's eyes. They're smiling, they're crinkling at the corners, but they're dead inside. He's watching you, like you're a seal he's about to eat." The metaphor was so brutal, so out of character for my gentle friend, that it had shocked me. I had been deeply offended, had accused her of being cynical, of being jealous of my happiness. It had caused the first real rift in our 20-year friendship. We had been polite, but distant, in the months that followed. I had chosen him over her. Now, sitting on the cold, unforgiving tile of my bathroom floor, her words echoed in my head, not as an insult, but as a prophecy, a clear, ignored warning from the one person who had seen the truth. I knew, with a certainty that was as absolute as my own despair, that Maria would be the one. If I didn't show up for our scheduled morning walk, she would be at my door. She would call, she would pound, and she would eventually, with her spare key, be the one to find me. She would be the one to raise the alarm, to break down the door, to call the police. But I also knew, with the cold, hard logic of a bank manager who understands transfer times and getaway speed, that by the time she did, Julian and my money would be a ghost. A domestic wellness check would be too slow. I couldn't wait to be rescued. I needed to launch a counterattack right now, from inside this room. I needed something faster. I needed a weapon. And as the initial blinding wave of despair began to recede, my mind, the banker's mind, the part of me that had been trained for 37 years to find anomalies, to remember details, to see patterns in a sea of data, began to desperately search its archives. And from the fog of my memory, a single, clear image emerged. A phone screen, a caller ID, and a kind, smiling face. Margaret. Part 3. The first wave of shock and despair was a physical paralysis. I sat on the floor for what felt like an hour, the world a silent gray fog. But then, my training kicked in. 37 years of it. I was a bank manager, and my life had just experienced a catastrophic, fraudulent withdrawal. What is the first step in the protocol? Secure the perimeter, assess the assets, and notify all involved parties. My mind, a muscle I had honed for decades, began to move, slowly at first, and then with a gathering, furious momentum. The conflict was a race against time. The obstacle was a locked door. My smart plan had to start with the assets I had at my disposal, right here, in this room. My eyes scanned the familiar landscape of my own bathroom. Toothbrush, towels, bathrobe. And then, my gaze fell on the vanity drawer, slightly ajar. And inside, I knew, was my secret weapon. It was a cheap, pay-as-you-go flip phone, the kind you buy at a 7-Eleven. I had bought it a year ago on the advice of our bank's security chief as a clean phone, a device with no apps, no data, no connection to my digital life, to be used only for two-factor authentication for my most secure accounts after my husband had passed. It was my emergency phone. And this, I thought, with a surge of cold electric adrenaline, qualified as an emergency. I crawled over to the vanity, my knees aching, and pulled open the drawer. There it was, a small, black, beautifully stupid piece of plastic. I flipped it open. The screen glowed to life, showing a full battery. He had taken my smartphone, the device that held my entire digital life. He had forgotten about the dumb phone, the one that could only do one thing: make a call. But who to call? The police? They would be too slow. Maria? She would get me out, but she couldn't stop him. I needed to do something he would never, ever anticipate. I needed to get ahead of him. My mind went back to the woman on his phone. Margaret, a client, a needy widow from up north. I had his phone number, but I didn't have hers. How could I find her? My mind, starved of a real problem to solve for months, latched onto the woman's face like a lifeline. Margaret. He had called her a client, a needy widow from up north. I had his phone number memorized, a string of digits that now felt like a curse. But I didn't have hers. How could I find her? A woman I had seen for a fleeting second on a phone screen. The task felt impossible, a whisper of a memory in a hurricane of panic. I closed my eyes, forcing the image of the locked door, of Julian's dead smile, out of my mind. I was a bank manager again, faced with a fraudulent transaction. What is the protocol? You don't look for the thief, you look for the origin of the transfer. You look for the point of connection. When had he connected with her? And then my banker's brain, the part that had been trained to cross-reference data points, made the leap. A conversation from 2, maybe 3 months ago. We were at a wine bar in Del Mar. He was on a high, celebrating a successful business trip, a seminar he had given in San Jose. Hooked a big one, Di, he had bragged, his voice a low, confident purr. A major new client, a widow with a significant inheritance. Her name is Margaret. She's going to be the cornerstone of our next phase. At the time, I had felt a pang of something. Pity for this anonymous widow. A vague unease at his triumphant tone. Now, the memory was a lightning strike. Margaret. San Jose. I still had the glossy brochure from that seminar, a beautifully designed piece of fraudulent propaganda tucked into the side pocket of my purse. A purse that was sitting on the dresser in my bedroom, on the other side of a solid oak door. A dead end. But my mind was already racing past the dead end. The brochure was gone, but the information was not. I remembered the name of the seminar, a phrase so full of cheesy, predatory optimism that it was impossible to forget. Golden years, golden opportunities. I looked at the small black flip phone in my hand. It was a relic, a dinosaur in a world of smartphones, but it had a web browser, a slow, clumsy but functional window to the outside world. My fingers, clumsy and shaking, began to peck at the tiny keypad. The T9 predictive text, a frustrating echo from a forgotten era. GOLDENYEARS. I slowly, painstakingly, typed the name of the seminar and San Jose into the search bar. I hit search, and the tiny screen began to load, a pixelated progress bar crawling across the top. It felt like an eternity. The search results finally appeared. A slow, agonizing crawl of blue, hyperlinked text. The first few were useless, ads for other retirement planning seminars. My hope began to fade. This was a fool's errand. But I kept scrolling, my thumb aching. And then I saw it. The headline was from a local San Jose community news blog, the kind of small-town digital paper that documents every local event. The headline read, "Financial Guru Promises Golden Opportunities to Local Seniors." My breath caught. I clicked the link. The page loaded even more slowly, the images appearing line by line. And there he was. A photo of Julian, his arms spread wide in a gesture of magnanimous welcome, his predatory smile beaming at a room full of adoring, hopeful retirees. And below the photo, the article, a fawning piece of local journalism, quoted one of the most enthusiastic new clients who had just signed on to Julian's exclusive fund. The article read, "He's a godsend," said Margaret Gable, a retired teacher from Ojai who attended the seminar. "To have someone with his expertise helping people like us, it's a blessing." Margaret Gable. From Ojai. I had a full name. I had a town. The ghost from the phone screen now had an identity. I was no longer a victim. I was a hunter. And I had just found the first track. Part 4. The ticking clock was Julian's getaway. He had my car, he had cash from my wallet, and he had a head start of at least an hour. Every minute I spent locked in this bathroom was a minute he was using to disappear. Finding Margaret's name was a breakthrough, but it was not a solution. Ojai was a small town, but I couldn't just call information. The subplot that became my only hope was the existence of this other woman. My mind, the part of me that had been a manager for 30 years, began to analyze the situation from a new perspective. Julian had called her a client. He had told me I was his partner. It was the classic language of a Ponzi scheme. He was using the money from new investors to pay off the old ones, creating the illusion of massive returns, all while siphoning off the majority for himself. Margaret was not just another victim. She was a part of the same fraudulent system as me. She was a fellow shareholder in the bankrupt enterprise of Julian's love. If he was draining my account now, it meant the entire rotten structure was collapsing. He was not just leaving me. He was leaving all of us. And that meant Margaret, the needy widow, was not my rival. She was my only ally. The complexity of my plan, I realized as I stared at the name on the tiny screen, was immense, almost laughably so. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own home. My only tool was a cheap, outdated phone. And my mission was to find a complete stranger, a woman I had never met, in a town I had only ever driven through. And somehow, in the course of a single, cold call, convince her that the financial savior she had just praised in a newspaper was, in fact, a predator who was, at that very second, likely in the process of draining her life savings. The sheer audacity of the task was overwhelming. How could I possibly do that? How could I break through a wall of trust and admiration with a single panicked phone call from a stranger? She would think I was insane. She would hang up, and Julian would win. My first logical step was a new search. Margaret Gable, Ojai. My fingers, more practiced now, flew over the keypad. The search results were a fresh wave of despair. There were dozens of Margaret Gables in the Ojai area. There was a real estate agent, a high school student, an obituary for a woman who had passed away 2 years ago. It was a common name. It was a needle in a haystack of 100 other needles. I was at a dead end. The precious minutes were ticking by. I could feel Julian getting further and further away, my money disappearing with every second of my fruitless search. The walls of the bathroom felt like they were closing in again, the cold tendrils of panic beginning to creep back into my heart. But then, my banker's brain, the part of me trained to verify identity, to match a name to a face, kicked in. The face. I had a face. I had seen her for only a second on Julian's phone, but the image was seared into my memory. The kind eyes, the warm smile, the specific way her hair curled just above her shoulders. I painstakingly navigated back to the local news article about the seminar. I waited, my breath held, as the low-resolution image slowly, painfully, loaded onto my screen. There was Julian, the smiling wolf at the center, and there, in the front row, looking up at him with an expression of pure, hopeful, and utterly heartbreaking admiration, was the woman from his phone. Her face. I had her face. I had visual confirmation. This changed everything. I was no longer just searching for a name. I was searching for her. I began a new, more specific kind of hunt. I started image searching. Margaret Gable, Ojai. The results were still a jumble. But now I had something to cross-reference. I could discard the high school student, the young real estate agent. I was looking for a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and that specific warm smile. I scrolled through dozens of images, my eyes aching from the strain of the tiny screen. And then I saw her. It was a small thumbnail image, linked to a different website. A website for the Ojai Garden Club. The photo was of a group of smiling women, holding trowels and pots of flowers. And there she was, in the center, identified in the caption as the club's president. I had my target. And now, I had her location in a new context. A context that might just give me a way to reach her. I just needed to find a number. Part 5. My mind raced. The practiced, methodical thought process of a bank manager assessing a critical security breach. I had a face, a name, and a town. It wasn't enough. I needed a phone number, and I needed it now. The flip phone's tiny screen and clunky browser were a frustratingly slow tool, but they were all I had. I started a new, more specific search, one that felt like a desperate, wild gamble. I typed in Margaret Gable, Ojai, community activities, social clubs. I was not just looking for a person. I was looking for a digital echo, a footprint. The search results were a sea of irrelevant noise. But then, buried on the third page, I found it. A link to a small, local news blog covering the Ojai Valley. It was an article from 6 months ago about the annual Ojai Garden Club charity luncheon. The article included a photo of the club's board members. And there she was. The same kind, smiling face from Julian's phone. The caption identified her. Club President, Margaret Gable. This was the turning point. It was a small detail, a piece of community news, but it was the key. The article, in its final paragraph, listed a contact number for the club, for more information on membership. It wasn't a personal number, it was the club's number. But it was a line, a direct electronic path into the world she inhabited. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I dialed the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up, my hope dissolving, when a woman's voice answered, her voice warm and slightly distracted. Ojai Garden Club. This is Margaret speaking. My breath caught in my throat. It was her. I had her. The president herself, answering the club's main line on a weekday afternoon. Margaret, I said, my voice a low, urgent whisper. My name is Diane Miller. I am in San Diego. You don't know me, but we have a mutual acquaintance. A man named Julian. I am in terrible, terrible trouble. And I believe you are too. The silence on the other end of the line was not one of confusion. It was a silence of pure, cold, dawning horror. I had just spoken the name of her savior, and I had called him a threat. Julian? She finally whispered, her voice a fragile, trembling thing. What about Julian? My breath caught in my throat. It was her. I had her. The president herself, answering the club's main line on a weekday afternoon. For a split second, I almost hung up. The reality of what I was about to do, the sheer destructive force of the words I was about to unleash on this unsuspecting woman's life, was overwhelming. But then, the image of Julian's cold, dead smile flashed in my mind, and my hesitation evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Margaret, I said, my voice a low, urgent whisper, forcing a tremor into it that was not entirely fake. My name is Diane Miller. I am in San Diego. Please, please do not hang up. We have a mutual acquaintance, a man named Julian. The warmth in her voice vanished, replaced by a confused, slightly defensive chill. Julian? How do you know him? She asked, her tone already guarded. I knew I couldn't come in with accusations. That would trigger her defenses, make her see me as a jealous ex-lover, a crazy woman. I had to use his own tactics against her. I had to build a rapport based on a shared positive experience. I'm one of his clients, I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. From the San Diego seminar. I was so impressed with him. I've invested with him. I believe you did too, from the San Jose event? Her voice warmed instantly. The wall came down. Oh, yes, she said, a relieved, happy laugh in her voice. Isn't he just a godsend? A blessing. So brilliant. I was just looking at my first dividend statement. The returns are incredible. My blood ran cold. He had sent her a fake statement, a piece of paper showing imaginary profits to keep her on the hook, to keep her compliant. He was paying her with her own money, or worse, with mine. This was the moment. I had to break through, and I had to do it now. Margaret, I said, my voice dropping, becoming a conspiratorial whisper. That's why I'm calling. I got a statement too. And my banker. I'm a retired bank manager, you see. She saw something unusual. A flag on the account the funds were coming from. She said it was a temporary holding account that was being liquidated today. She said it was an emergency. He's moving all the money, Margaret. All of it. The silence on the other end of the line was thick with confusion and a dawning, terrible fear. Liquidated? What do you mean? He's reinvesting, he said, in a new European fund. She was reciting his lies, clinging to the narrative he had built for her. I didn't have time for a long story. I couldn't debate her. I had to give her a single, undeniable, and terrifyingly simple instruction. A call to action that would bypass her hope and speak directly to her fear. Margaret, I said, my voice now hard and clear, stripped of all pretense. Stop talking. Stop thinking about what he told you. Get off this phone, go to your computer, and log into your real bank account. The one you transferred the money from. Not his statements. Your bank. Right now. I will wait. I heard a sharp, ragged gasp on the other end of the line, then the sound of a chair scraping, of frantic, fumbling footsteps. I waited, the seconds stretching into an eternity, the silence of 2 lives hanging in the balance. Then I heard a sound that I would never forget. It was not a scream. It was a low, guttural animal sound of pure, soul-crushing despair. It was the sound of a woman's world breaking apart. In that moment, the power dynamic of my own story was completely and irrevocably altered. I was no longer a lone victim. I had just deputized my first and most important ally in a war that had just gone from a personal crisis to a multi-victim conspiracy. Part 6. The immediate consequence of my call was a second echoing scream of betrayal 150 miles up the coast. Margaret, as she told me later, had dropped the phone and run to her computer. She had found exactly what I had predicted. Her accounts, drained, her life savings, gone. Her shock, however, quickly morphed into a cold, hard fury that mirrored my own. She was not a woman who would sit and cry. She was a woman who had run a community garden club for 20 years. She knew how to organize. The repercussion for Julian, though he was still blissfully unaware, was that he no longer had a single, isolated victim to manage. He now had 2, and those 2 victims were now in communication. His strategy of divide and conquer had just been shattered. While Margaret was having her own terrible revelation, I was still locked in the bathroom. But now, I had a purpose. I called my best friend, Maria. The story came tumbling out. No longer a shameful confession, but a tactical briefing. Her reaction was everything I knew it would be. A string of furious, inventive curses, followed by a single, practical question. What do you need me to do, Di? Get me out, I said, and bring your bolt cutters. My call with Margaret had ignited a fire 100 miles away, but I was still a prisoner. I was a general orchestrating a war from a cage. The adrenaline from the call began to fade, replaced by the cold, hard reality of my own situation. The house was silent. Julian was gone. Maria was on her way. All I could do was wait. I sat on the cold floor, the flip phone clutched in my hand, a useless talisman now that its primary purpose had been served. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Every creak of the house, every distant siren sent a jolt of panicked hope through me. Was that her? Was that the police? Then, I heard it. The sound of tires screeching to a halt in my driveway. Maria's beat-up old Subaru, no doubt. A car door slammed with a force that seemed to shake the house. "Diane!" Her voice was a muffled roar from the other side of the front door. "Diane, are you in there?" I heard the rattling of the doorknob, then a furious, sustained pounding that vibrated through the floor. "He locked the deadbolt, Maria," I shouted, my voice hoarse. "You can't get in." There was a brief pause, and then I heard her voice again, no longer at the front door, but closer, at the bathroom window, which was high and frosted for privacy. "Stand back from the door, Di," she yelled. I scrambled to the far side of the bathroom, pressing myself against the cool tile of the shower. What followed was a sound of pure, concentrated, and deeply satisfying suburban rage. It was the sound of Maria, a 50-year-old kindergarten teacher, kicking in my front door. I heard a splintering crash, a sound of violated wood and shattered expectations, followed by the heavy thud of her footsteps stomping through my house. "Diane?" she called, her voice closer now. "In here!" I yelled. I heard her jiggle the bathroom doorknob, then a frustrated curse. "Stay back," she commanded. A moment later, the door shuddered in its frame as she threw her shoulder against it. Once, twice. On the third impact, the lock splintered, and the door flew open, crashing against the wall. Maria stood in the doorway panting, her face flushed, a look of righteous, beautiful fury in her eyes. In her hand, absurdly, she was holding a tire iron. She found me on the floor, still clutching the small black flip phone. She didn't rush to hug me. Her eyes did a quick professional sweep of the room, of me, assessing the damage with a fierce, protective love. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice tight. I just shook my head, unable to speak. "Okay," she said, nodding, the crisis manager taking over. "Okay. I called the police from the car. They're on their way. I called your bank. I gave them the passphrase. Your accounts are frozen. The bleeding is stopped." She took a deep breath, and her eyes softened just a fraction. "Now," she said, a low, dangerous growl in her voice as she extended a hand to help me up. "Let's go get your money back." The shame that had been my prison for the past few hours began to recede, replaced by the warm, solid, and slightly terrifying presence of my friend. I was not alone. I had an army. It was a small army, an army of one kindergarten teacher with a tire iron, a retired bank manager with a flip phone, and a grieving stranger 100 miles away. But it was an army nonetheless, and the war had just begun. Part 7. My growth began the moment I stepped out of that bathroom. The challenge was to fight the tidal wave of shame and self-blame that threatened to drown me. I was a bank manager. I had spent my life advising other people on how to protect their money. How could I have been such a fool? The temptation to retreat, to hide, to let the police and the lawyers handle it, was immense. But then I thought of Margaret. I thought of her kind, trusting face in that photograph. I was not the only victim, and that knowledge gave me a strength I did not know I possessed. My transformation was from a victim into an advocate. My first call was back to Margaret. We spoke for an hour, our two stories weaving together into a single, ugly tapestry of deceit. He had used the same lines on her, the same stories, the same promises. We were not two separate victims. We were two data points in a single, clear, and damning pattern. "He's not just a con man, Margaret," I said, a new cold clarity in my voice. "He's a predator, and we are going to hunt him." I had to overcome my own professional humiliation. I had to walk into the police station the next day, not as a source of expertise, but as a victim. It was one of the hardest things I had ever done. But I did not go alone. Maria came with me, and I did not go with just my story. I went with two stories. I presented the officer not with a hysterical, emotional account, but with a clear, concise, and damning timeline of a multi-victim financial crime. I used the language I knew: assets, transfers, patterns, conspiracy. The police officer, a young, tired-looking detective, had started the interview with a look of bored resignation. By the end, she was sitting on the edge of her seat, a look of pure professional interest on her face. I was not just a victim anymore. I was her best and most organized witness. Part 8. The police, armed with 2 credible witnesses and a clear, multi-jurisdictional pattern of fraud, moved with surprising speed. The case was immediately escalated to their Economic Crimes Division. The lead detective, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miller, recognized Julian's pattern immediately. "This guy's a professional," she'd said to me over the phone. "He preys on women in your demographic. He's probably got a dozen others on the hook right now." My preparation for the climax was no longer about personal revenge. It was about a collaborative, multi-agency manhunt. I became a civilian consultant on my own case. I spent my days at the police station, working with Detective Miller and her team. I helped them build a psychological profile of Julian. I analyzed his language, his tactics, the specific emotional triggers he used. My banker's brain, my 37 years of assessing risk and character, was now a tool for the police. We were preparing not just to catch him, but to build a case so overwhelmingly powerful that he would never see the light of day again. The climax was not going to be a single confrontation, but a quiet, patient, and technologically sophisticated trap. The police, working with my bank's fraud department, had an idea. Julian had my money, but he hadn't been able to move it yet, thanks to Sarah's quick call. It was sitting in a series of domestic accounts he had opened under a fake business name, waiting to be laundered. The police plan was simple. They were going to let him. They were going to watch him, digitally, and wait for him to lead them to the rest of his network, to the bigger fish he was undoubtedly working with. My role in this was to wait, to trust the system I had once been a part of, and to prepare for the final, satisfying moment of justice. Part 9. The climax of my story was not a moment of high drama, but one of quiet, satisfying digital precision. It happened on a Thursday, 2 weeks after I had been locked in my own bathroom. I was at the police station, in a small, windowless room the detectives called the war room. It was filled with computer monitors, a large smartboard displaying a map of Southern California, and the low, intense hum of a half-dozen focused investigators. I was there as a civilian observer, a courtesy that Detective Miller had extended to me, a quiet acknowledgement of my role in building the case. For days we had been watching. The police, with the bank's cooperation, had placed a digital tracer on my stolen funds. We had watched as Julian, or whatever his real name was, had attempted to move the money. He was a ghost, using public Wi-Fi networks, routing the funds through a dizzying series of anonymous cryptocurrency wallets. He was good, but the police cybercrimes unit was better. They were tracking his digital footprints, slowly but surely, closing the net. The final piece of the puzzle came from a source I never would have expected: a traffic camera. The detectives had correlated the timestamp of one of his crypto transfers, which had originated from a coffee shop's Wi-Fi in Beverly Hills, with the traffic camera footage from the intersection outside. On the screen, Detective Miller paused and zoomed in. A man in a baseball cap was seen leaving the coffee shop and getting into a late-model Mercedes. The license plate was clear. The car was registered not to Julian, but to a woman named Isabella Rossi, with an address in a luxury high-rise in Century City. This was the climax. The moment the digital ghost was given a physical address. "He's not just using women for their money," Miller said, a look of cold disgust on her face. "He's living with one. She's either his next victim or she's his partner." A quick background check revealed that Isabella was a wealthy, recently divorced heiress. He was doing it again. He was already lining up his next mark, living in her home, while he was still laundering the money he had stolen from me and Margaret. The vengeance was in the quiet, professional, and utterly emotionless dispatch of the arrest warrant. I watched as Detective Miller made the call to the LAPD. There was no shouting, no sirens. It was just a calm, methodical, and completely unstoppable process. I had not confronted him. I had not screamed at him. I had simply taken the small, ugly facts of my own humiliation, organized them, and handed them to a system that was designed for one purpose: to deliver consequences. I sat in that quiet, humming room, and I felt not a sense of triumph, but a profound, quiet sense of order being restored to the universe. Part 10. The arrest was a quiet, anticlimactic affair. The police picked him up in the lobby of Isabella's building as he was heading out for his morning jog. His real name was Mark Thorne, and he had a history of similar schemes in 3 other states. The case against him was so overwhelming that he never saw a courtroom. He took a plea deal, resulting in a lengthy prison sentence. His assets, including the money he had stolen from me and Margaret, were seized. The long-term consequence for me was a new, unexpected, and deeply fulfilling sense of purpose. The story of the banker, the teacher, and the con man, as a local news outlet had dubbed our case, had turned me, Margaret, and even the quiet Detective Miller into local heroes, symbols of a community fighting back against elder fraud. The shame that had once been my private prison was now the source of my public strength. The news of Mark Thorne's arrest and conviction was a quiet, clinical affair, a paragraph in the local paper that I read with a strange sense of detachment. His imprisonment was a legal fact, a neat and tidy end to a messy chapter. But it did not bring the closure I had expected. The silence in my house returned, but it was a different kind of silence now, one filled not with grief, but with the restless, buzzing energy of a problem not yet fully solved. I had gotten my money back. I had seen justice served. But what now? What was I supposed to do with this terrible, hard-won knowledge? The world was still full of Julians, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that there were thousands of other Dianes and Margarets sitting in their quiet homes, their fingers hovering over the confirm transfer button. The idea came, as most good ideas do, over a cup of coffee with a friend. Margaret had driven down from Ojai to visit, and we were sitting on my patio, 2 survivors, 2 soldiers after a long and brutal war. "You know," she said, her voice thoughtful as she looked out at my garden, "everything he told me, it sounded so real. I felt so stupid. But now, after talking to you, I don't feel stupid. I feel educated." That was the word. Educated. The long-term consequence of our shared trauma was not just a returned fortune. It was an education. A very expensive, very painful education in the art of the modern con. "We should teach a class," I said, the words surprising me as they came out. The idea, once spoken, felt so obvious, so absolutely, fundamentally right, that it was like a light turning on in a dark room. The emotional resolution was not in his punishment. It was in the prevention of the next one. We would not be victims. We would be teachers. We would take the very weapon he had used against us, the seminar, the promise of financial freedom, and we would reforge it into a shield for others. We would create our own workshop, not to sell a dream, but to expose a nightmare. We took our idea to Detective Miller. Her eyes, so often filled with a weary cynicism, lit up with a rare, genuine enthusiasm. She saw the potential immediately. The police could make arrests, but they couldn't stop the crime at its source. We could. She offered us the police department's community outreach program as a partner, giving us an immediate platform and an unimpeachable legitimacy. Golden years, golden opportunities, was dead. The SHIELD Project, as we decided to call it, was born. Our first workshop was held in the same community center where Julian had found his victims. We didn't offer get-rich-quick schemes or promises of a glamorous retirement. We offered practical, real-world, and often brutal advice. I stood at a podium, my 37 years of banking experience no longer a memory of a past life, but a vital, active tool. I taught them about wire transfers, about the irreversibility of cryptocurrency, about the legal fiction of offshore holding accounts. Margaret, with her gentle, empathetic voice, told her own story, not as a cautionary tale of a victim, but as a case study in psychological manipulation, teaching the other women to recognize the language of the love bomb, the tactics of the pressure sale. We didn't just teach them what to look for, we taught them how to fight back. We gave them the phone numbers for the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, for the FTC, for local law enforcement. We gave them a playbook. We gave them an army. I had lost my sense of security, the naive belief that the world was a safe and orderly place. But in its place, I had found my voice, and it was the voice of a bank manager, a teacher, a protector, and it was louder and stronger than it had ever been. A year later, I was standing at a podium in a packed community center, leading one of our seminars. In the front row, I saw a woman I recognized, Isabella Rossi, the woman who could have been his next victim. She had come to listen, to learn. After the talk, she came up to me, her eyes full of a quiet, profound gratitude. "You saved my life," she whispered. I shook my head. "No," I said, taking her hand. "We saved each other's." Con artists thrive in the silence created by shame. They count on their victims being too embarrassed, too humiliated to speak up. This story is a testament to the power of breaking that silence. It is a reminder that your story, your experience, is not a source of shame. It is a weapon. It is a lesson. It is a light for others. If you or someone you love has been targeted, please speak up. Talk to a friend, a family member, the authorities. Your voice is the one thing they cannot steal. If this story of women who found their power by sharing their truth inspired you, please like and subscribe.